good afternoon. I hope everyone can hear me. I would like to start by introducing myself. My name is Jenny Stiff, and I work in the Gifted Office as an academic instructional coach. And today I will be talking with you about creativity identification. So just keep in mind as we begin this process that creativity is probably the most unknown of the 5 areas of giftedness. So if you're feeling like this process is a bit daunting, it can be. And even here at the Gifted Office, we're still learning about creativity. And so just keep that in mind as we move forward, that I'm going to try to make this process as concrete and as applicable to schools as possible and keep it as streamlined for you so that these concepts can be identified in children moving forward. So as we're going to start by just looking at what KDE defines, how KDE defines creativity. So we'll look at this together. Creativity or divergent thinking means possessing either potential or demonstrated ability to perform at an exceptionally high level in creative thinking and divergent approaches to conventional tasks. This is evidenced by innovative or creative reasoning, advanced insight, imagination, and solving problems in a unique way. Some of the things that I want to highlight is the word divergent. We're going to be breaking down that word because the law always sounds very complex. And we want to make sure that we understand what it is we're measuring and identifying. And so keep in mind as we move forward that these things will be explained more explicitly. So we're going to start with breaking down divergent thinking. What does that mean and how do we assess this in students? Well, divergent thinking comes in 4 categories, as you can see. The first one is fluency, second one flexibility, originality, and elaboration. And I've given you a sort of mini definition. So fluency is just a lot of ideas. Flexibility is how those ideas are categorized, and we'll look at some examples in just a little bit to help make this more concrete. Originality is probably the hardest one. It's novel ideas, brand new ideas that no one else has thought of. And in a world with so much happening so quickly, new ideas are becoming harder and harder for people to think about. So keep that one in mind. And elaboration is just what it sounds like. How well can they elaborate on their ideas? So now let's apply what this looks like in the identification process. Let's start with, here at the Gifted Office, we of course want to promote the most inclusive method. And so I'm going to be going through an inclusive method, giving you some options there, and then I'm going to give you a more practical method that might be a better fit for your school, and you'll get to decide that as we move forward. So the first thing that I would do if you were trying to be the most inclusive you can be is screeners for every student. And when I use the word screeners, if you look here on the screen and you click the hyperlink, you're going to be taken to 4 screeners that we've provided here at the Gifted Office. You could use any one of these screeners, and I would start there, as I said, and give it to every student. And so I have an example of one of those screeners for you. One of them says, imagine that you woke up one day with 5 arms instead of 2. How would your life be different? And you tell the students to list as many ways as they can think of in the box below. We're going to use the grading criteria on the right to measure the student's product of listing how the life would change it with 5 arms. So we're going to look at fluency, flexibility, originality, and elaboration as we move forward. The first example we're looking at is the rubric is on the left and the child's example, the student example, is on the right. And one thing I want to mention is I have 4 examples, and when I am looking at this, I keep them all in front of me. The idea is to compare students amongst one another, not individually rate students, because you're going to be able to omit things by common answers. So the first thing that I saw in looking at all 4 responses was a lot of people talked about that they would be able to do more tasks more quickly. So automatically those responses that are the most common are the ones that students would not get points by. And so let's kind of go through the rubric to make that a little more real for you. So we're going to start with our first score. You can see this student got a fluency score of 4. I always start with fluency and flexibility because, as you can see on the rubric, those are the easiest to measure. So the first one, fluency, is just literally the number of ideas the student listed. So in my first example, this student listed 1, 2, 3, 4 examples, and therefore she got a fluency score of 4. The next, flexibility, is looking at those 4 listed ideas and determining how many categories we could place those ideas in. And so let's look at the first example. I would be able to cook, type, and clean at the same time. Well, if you think about that, that student is describing a task. The tasks would become easier if they had 5 arms. The next one says, I could get ready faster in the morning by doing hair and makeup. Again, that's a task. So that right now we're only in one category. Flexibility is measuring how many different categories the student's ideas fit into. Only a task still. So we're only at 1 flexibility point so far. I could iron multiple sets of clothes for my family. Again, it's a task. And then the third one, my life would be easier at home because I could complete multiple tasks at the same time and I would be more productive. As you can see, all 4 of these students' listed items on how their life would change. There's no variance in the flexibility. Every single one of this child's lists has to do with tasks. So I can almost already tell you that this would be one I would move on and pass the screener. I would not put this in a pile to move forward with the identification process. But I'm going to go ahead and finish out the rubric to help you see. Originality is how novel are the ideas that she listed. And if you look at the rubric, you can get a 0, a 1, or a 2. Well, she got a 0 because she uses common ideas that speak to doing something better. And that's very common. So she got 0 points there. Now we're going to look at the green column, elaboration. And she also got a 0 here because she doesn't really give a lot of specifics on how things would change. So this total score of this student would be a 5. Now we're going to move forward and I'm going to show you a couple more so you can see a comparison and how this would work with your kid. The next one got a total score of 16. If you notice, the previous student only had a total score of 5. So right now there's a big difference between those numbers. First of all, the fluency, this student had twice as many ideas. They had 8 ideas versus the last student only had 4. Flexibility is strong in this student. If you look at it, the first one, difficult to buy shirts that fit, would have to cut extra holes. So she's talking about adapting her wardrobe, which is what would have to happen if you had 5 arms. So that's an adaptation. We would categorize that under flexibility as an adaptation the student would have to make if they had 5 arms. The next one, washing dishes, would be a piece of cake. Well, that's a task, going back to some of those common things we saw on the previous students' responses. So that's a different category in the area of flexibility. So I want you to notice we already have 2 categories with only 2 responses, whereas the previous child had 4 listed things and all 4 were the same flexibility. So we already have 2 here. The third one says, my shoulders would be very tired from just sitting around with all the extra weight. That's a very different than adaptation. It's not a task. It's an awareness. So there's a third category. And so right now this student is already at 3 in the flexibility scale. So let's move down. Typing papers would be super fast. That's a task. It's not a new introduced flexibility category, so we're still only at 3. Driving wouldn't be at 10 and 2. It would be at 1, 4, 7, 9, and 11. That's a task. They're driving a car. It would change. Next one, I could hug, high five, bump fist 5 students at a time, so morning greetings would only take 30 seconds. That's a relationship. So there's where I got the 4 on my rubric, showing that she had 4 different flexibility categories in her fluency, which is her list of things responses. Let's move on to originality. I highlighted this student's answer because this was the most original response out of all of the small sample I'm modeling for you today. 4 students, this one was the most unique. Almost everyone else focused on tasks and things would be easier. This student clearly said driving, very, very specific. Did you notice? So the elaboration is there. She's giving very specific things, 10 and 2, now we're at all these different numbers. So I highlighted that and gave her a score of 2 on originality because it was a highly novel concept. So that's really cool, and it's also elaborated on. So you can see I went over to the, provides intricate details on precisely. She's precisely giving you her hand position. So I would also score that as a 2. So overall, this student's score is a 16. Let's continue and look at a couple more examples. So the next one, this student got an overall score of 15. And I think by now I'm going to give you a minute to look at some of the responses and think about, first of all, fluency is easy. You can count her bulleted list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them. So she got a total score of fluency of 9. Now I want you to look at the list and think about the flexibility. You can see my responses, but I want you to sort of process yourself while I'm modeling it, since I've already talked through it twice. So if you're kind of looking through the list, the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items are all tasks. So that's only 1 flexibility score so far. Then you go down to almost the bottom and she says, the downfall would be that my clothing would have to be specially tailored. That's a totally different task. We're going into adaptation again, very similar to a previous response on another student. And then the next one down, I would become an advocate for people with differences. So that's a pretty good answer. She's very aware of how her life would change in a different way. So we call that like a service, or she's now more socially aware of others' perception of her. So that's totally different than a task. So now that's where I got the score of flexibility of 3. Her answers weren't very original. She had some that impact daily activities, but most of them were like some of the other responses coming along, and so we don't give them points for that. And then her elaboration is pretty good. I gave her full points on this, because if you look at the very first response, the student says, I could play 2 pianos and the treble clef of a keyboard at the same time. That's pretty phenomenal. I don't know much about music, but the fact that she's very specific is she's elaborating. She didn't say, just to give you a difference, I could play a lot of instruments. She's very specific on what she can play. So keep that in mind. That's why I gave her more points in elaboration. So I really liked this student's score. The next one and final one we're going to look at, this student got a score of 11. And the same premise walks through. You can see her 6 listed things on how her life would change. There's her her fluency score. Her flexibility is pretty strong with only 6. She had 3 different categories, and if you look on the screen, you can see in my penmanship, the pen, what I wrote as the categories. This would be something you would sit down with your GT committee after you've screened your 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, if you're in elementary school, everyone in middle school, and all the way through 11th grade for high school. So you would sit down with your GT committee, keep this group in front of you, and narrow down your list. So basically, just like anything, we're filtering out students and narrowing down our talent pool for the identification process. Looking at this first one, the 5 arms test, I would think a lot of you are thinking that the inclusive way isn't as practical. So I wanted to give you one other option, because this would be time consuming. I do want to reiterate that this is a process and it's not something that happens quickly. So keep that in mind as you move forward. So I want to stop and just move back. I would have nominated the 15 and the 16, just to let you know, okay? And the other 2 would have been put aside and we wouldn't move further. So now I want to go back to another screener. I'm sharing this one because I think this one is even faster, especially when I think about middle schools who are testing the entire school and have 1,000 students. So I gave you a part of the Torrance test of creativity. This is only a small screener. I included this slide here, so if you wanted teachers to just insert this into something they're using, or if you're testing your students, this would be already created for you. So you would give the students a copy of this piece of paper with these little snippets of drawings. As you see in the directions, you would give them 10 minutes, and you tell them you can add as little or as much as you want. and you don't want to give them any other input. You just sit quietly and let them work. I always encourage you to use color and markers, color pencils, whatever you want to do, but you can do it in pencil too if it's time and you just don't want to mess with all of that. You'll still see creative examples coming through. This slide is just a printable version of the Torrance screener, and I wanted to give it to you. So now we're going to look at some examples to help you see the exact same process, except with a different screener. I believe this one would be quite a bit faster because there's not really a rubric that goes with it, but you still want to think about those 4 areas of fluency, flexibility, originality, and elaboration. And it's pretty easy to see when we move forward at the examples what I'm talking about. And I'm going to also reiterate something Dr. Coleman said at a principal's meeting the other day. She had just come back from a defense, and I believe she said something like, she knew creativity when you see it. And as cliche as that sounds, that's kind of true. It's right there in your face when you see a truly creatively gifted kid. They're just a little bit different. So let's look at some examples and help make this a little more concrete. So let's look at this first one. First of all, you might look at this one and actually think, oh, it's pretty cute. The artistic ability is pretty strong. So let's talk about some of the ways that you would look at it through a creative lens. First of all, there are 9 different pictures. So the student kept inside the box. If you notice, 9 boxes. The student did not extend outside of any of the boxes. So right there, they would get no points for that. Only parts where I would add some extra points for this student is in the top row where you see the sailboat. They added an additional thing besides adding to the drawing. That counts as a point right there. That sun has nothing to do with the original picture. So because the student added to the picture and then added something extra, that's a score. The only other one where I see that the student did that is in the 100% check plus. And so that's 2 added. Believe it or not, she added 2 extra items here. And so that's pretty good, I guess. The rest of them, if you notice the rabbit, that looks like ears. Most people, when given this test, make ears out of that. The bird, most people make a fish or a bird out of this one, as you can see in the top corner. The snake is very common response in the bottom corner. The nose is a bit unique, and the eye, I'm thinking that's what that is. But again, everything is together. So the only extra points that I would give them are for the sunshine and the 100% and the plus sign underneath the check. The ice cream cone, that's pretty standard. Most people do an ice cream cone or draw a shape there. And the circle, of course, at the bottom, that's what most people do. So this student, even though their artistic ability is kind of good, I would move them as a no, we won't be moving further in the screening process with this student. Let's look at another example. So now this is the same Torrance screener, and this time we're seeing quite a bit of a difference. First of all, I want you to notice that the child certainly extended outside of those 9 boxes. They created 3 pictures instead of 9 individual pictures, connecting some of those little pieces together. Also, talk about originality here. These are very unique, particularly the one in the middle and the one on the right side licking the ice cream cone. So those are very unique. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find another child who drew something exactly like that. So there you would give that child a lot of points for originality. Their flexibility score is very high because they came outside of the boxes. Then the fluency, there's ideas rolling, a lot of ideas in this picture. And then something that most of you might not notice, but this is very interesting and worthy of pointing out is, on the left, the flute player's flute extends past the line. That's that old cliche thinking of thinking outside of the box. We literally mean the child was not constrained by that outside box. The flute extends past the line just a little bit, but it is enough to earn them points. And then again, on the other side, if you look very closely at the ice cream cone, it too extends past the box that most children and adults stay confined in. So this would definitely be moved into a keep pile or further screening as we're talking. And keep in mind, we're still just screening the entire school. That's where we are in the process. Let's look at one more example. So here's a pretty typical response, pencil only. I want you to take a look at it and maybe think about what you would do. Would it go into the creativity further screening pile, or would it go into the no further screening required? Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about it. First of all, this is probably the most regular response you will get, meaning this is about the 50th percentile, very average. You can see that there were 9 pictures created, no extending outside of the lines. The only piece that gives me a little bit of interest is the bed, I'm going to call it, that has some 3-dimensional tendencies. That's showing some awareness of some thinking there. But other than that, the heart is very typical. The pig, the flower, the stop sign, the triangle, the cookie, I'm calling it. And again, we've seen the snake already. So I hope that you have decided that this one would have been no further screening necessary. We're moving it aside. This is the original screener. I've had people ask me that before. And so this, of course, without even really explaining it, I hope you immediately thought, yes, we need to continue screening this child. First of all, they took all 9 boxes and were able to rise up away from it, imagine an entire picture from 9 little bitty pictures. That's pretty amazing. The second thing that you want to notice, and I hope you've been paying attention now, is right at the top. It's hard to see, but look carefully. The part of, I'm going to call it a lion, part of the lion's head is extending up outside of that original box. So there are 2 more points that I would certainly say that's highly creative. Was not constrained by lines and boxes. So again, we would move this child into more screeners and the creative process, okay? Identification process.
First grade?
So now, I've shown you 2 screeners. The first one would require a little more work, maybe a smaller school. The second one is a little bit quicker. You can buzz through those faster. So I'm trying to think realistic and practical, but also keeping in lines with KDE and the requirements for identification. So now, what's next? We've screened the entire school. My filter is getting smaller. I have a pile of about 25 to 30% of the kids who we've kept. What do we do? So, as I've seen, as you see on the slide, you would want to give them 2 to 3, maybe additional screeners. Also, if you didn't want to do any more screeners, you could jump down to some of these other options: jot downs, checklists, hope scale, student work. And from there, the hopes is you would find 3 pieces of identification, and you could nominate those students and come up with 3 for creativity. So if you look at the jot down, these are all hot links for you. These are all located in our gifted drive under creativity. But you can see that a lot of these jot downs are here. They're printable. Your teachers can do them once you've narrowed your pool. We don't want to overwhelm them, but we do want to make sure we're following this process and making it accountable for everyone. Another one are checklists. You can click on that and see another way to identify students, another piece of that. So keeping in mind now, we have an original screener of the entire school. We now have an additional 2 or 3 screeners, and with a hope scale, now you have your 3 pieces of evidence, and you can start making your list of students who you would identify for creativity. Okay? I want to give you a second option that maybe you're the type of leader and folks in your building really want to test. We have COGAT and MAP testing for some of our other areas of giftedness, and there are creativity tests. I've already mentioned the Torrance test of creativity. It is very expensive, but there are pieces of it that I shared with you. You can certainly look into it, but that's up to you and your school. Another option that we really like here at the Gifted Office is the PCA. It is available in several sites online, and it's a much more reasonable rate. And so I'll let you look into that as something you really want to test. So what does that mean? So how that would look is you would screen the entire school. So again, I would give them the 5 arms test or the Torrance test. And from there, you've got your top 25 to 30% of students who passed the initial screener. You would then give them the PCA. I will say the PCA comes with reproducibles, explicit directions on how to administer and score it. We have a copy here in the Gifted Office, so if anyone is interested in discussing this, you could reach out to me via email, and we can happily chat. Okay? And so, of course, if you do down this avenue of buying the creativity test, you would get percentage scores, just like any test. And we would encourage you to nominate students who scored in the 90th percentile on the creativity test, and of course have 2 additional criteria options. The screener would count as an initial one. The PCA would count as a second piece of evidence, and then you could go down to any one of our other items, jot down, checklist, anecdotal notes, hope scale, things like that. And then you would have your 3 pieces of evidence. So now let's get to more practical things for you, because screening an entire school is a pretty daunting process. It is. But it is the most inclusive, and it's the way to find the kids that we really want. So I hope you consider that option. But another option is more practical, would be to create a Google form. And I must say I have to give a shout out to Amy Stride over at Barrett Middle School. She is a very logical and analytical thinker, and I am not that kind of thinker. And so she really helped me streamline my ideas and help me. So I wanted to make sure to give her a shout out on that. And so the first thing they're doing, and that I think we should all do, I love it, is to create a Google form. And they're going to send it to everybody, teachers, parents, and students. And they're going to nominate students who they think, based on look-fors and characteristics of creativity, who they think would be good nominations. And so you're skipping that screening the whole school. Your hope is your teachers and your parents and your students will do that screening process for you. And so in a class size of, let's take middle school, 30 to 32, really 2 to 5 students is about all you would want to nominate. In elementary school with class sizes at 24, you wouldn't want to do more than about 4. So remember, you're still just narrowing down the process. So the Google form asks for the initial names, and when you get those names back, you would then give them 2 to 3 screeners. And then, of course, from there, now our list is getting smaller, and we would, from there, find jot downs, checklists, or student work. Keep in mind, creative writing samples, science fair projects, any kind of project. Really, when you look at it, you're like, wow, that's different. That's worthy of saving, taking a picture of it, and using it as a piece of identification. We only need 3 in the area of creativity. So the process is the same. There's just whether you want to be the most inclusive or maybe a little more practical for getting the job. So let's look at creativity look-fors. Let's say you've decided you're going to do the practical method. So in your Google form, you would want to give your teachers and your parents these look-fors so they know, what am I looking for?
1, 2, 3,
so believe
5, 6, 7,
one of the most
9, 10, 11.
One of the best characteristics of creativity is energy. Children with energy, and it's pretty noticeable. You can almost feel their energy from them. That is the #1 characteristic of a creative person. So I put that one first. They can be passionate. They can be impulsive. Typically, they're wild and come up with silly ideas. They are the ones that will distract you during class. They're the ones who would say, well, I wonder what would happen if. That's a creative thinker. So keep that in mind as you look at it. And now we're going to look at characteristics of creatively gifted kids as well. I like to have you look at both positive and negative characteristics, because a lot of times some of our students only showcase negative characteristics. But if you see some of these, please don't use this as a rule to omit. This is clearly telling you, if you see a child who questions, fearless, they're stubborn, they're uncooperative,
11 minus 5
might be a
equals?
sign that they are actually creatively
Do you have a
gifted.
6?
And I would encourage you to nominate them and see if we can't channel that in a more positive way.
Yeah, you do.
To help that child move forward.
Mr. Drew has one
So
too.
take a look at the positive side. Again, we're seeing some common things. There's that energetic piece. Independent, original, they're funny. A lot of times they're those kids, especially little kids, they get sarcasm a lot earlier. They try to use sarcasm. That's signs that they're actually creatively gifted, because they're able to pick up on that at younger age. Keeping in mind that when you're identifying for creativity, you must measure either informally or formally these 4 areas: originality, fluency, elaboration, and flexibility of thought. And we have rubrics, we have lots of things to help you. So I hope that it's making more sense through my examples and my my rubrics and my screeners. Here again is a rubric to help measure that. We don't want this to be subjective. We want it to be objective, measurable data.
Really count
So
hard,
you want to
don't
make sure
you?
you're using something
Because you're
that
doing it
keeps
right,
you following the
but you keep
guidelines.
counting the wrong one. So you'd be
And
getting,
here again, keep in mind, I've said this many times, but we'll reiterate it again. You need to have 3 pieces of evidence in order to nominate a child for creativity. And any one of these
if you want to get the right answer,
5 things would count
you
as
gather
pieces of
equations for
evidence.
me. Let me
So
see
we've
what
talked
else
about
you can do.
screeners, then we've talked about additional screeners, we've talked about recommendations, and maybe a hope scale. You have more than enough evidence, and that's how you would come up with the list of students who you will nominate for creativity. So that's all I have on the time for today.
5
And
equals?
don't forget to tune in next
have an 8?
week for visual performing arts. And I
Yes,
hope
it
you enjoyed this
does.
presentation. Have a great Friday. Thanks for tuning in.